Lake City. Hey, Jake, how are you? Salt Lake Jake. Salt Lake Jake.
Salt Lake Jake.
Salt Lake Jake.
Welcome to Salt Lake Jake's Take. I am Salt Lake Jake. I've got my guys Peter and Brennan here with me. How are we, fellas?
Doing great, Jake.
Doing great.
Excellent.
Jake.
We have an epic guest with us today. I'm so excited when I found out he's going to be able to join us. An absolute legendary voice, the voice of Salt Lake baseball. When the Buzz came into Salt Lake in 1994, I was a teenager, and I love all sports, and I was so excited. And I remember driving around the valley listening to the voice of the Salt Lake Buzz, the legendary, one-of-a-kind Mr. Steve Klauke is joining us today. Also the voice of course, Weber State basketball and football. Steve, how are you, my man?
Doing well. Just sitting here in my spacious hotel in downtown Reno. It's coming off a nice win last night, so it's a pleasure to be with you guys.
Excellent. We are so excited to talk with you. Obviously, this is a Utah football podcast. We're going to jump into Weber State, but I asked our listeners a couple questions that they wanted to know from Steve, and so I'm gonna get into that before we get into the football. First of all, your legendary home run call. It's up there. It's out there. It's gone. How did that come into existence, and how did you make that your own?
Well, it's funny because it was a situation where my boss at the time, Brian Douglas, who was the director of broadcasting for the Jazz, they were happy that I was going to take over on the radio side for the Buzz. And so he thought I needed a catchphrase of some kind, whether it be a home run or something else. And I was actually driving up to Weber State to watch a football game. And I was just trying things out in my head as I was driving up. And that one kind of stuck. I kind of liked it. I kind of pictured it in my head in regards to a home run. And I thought, this fits. I mean, it's kind of an offshoot, maybe a little bit from Harry Caray's. It might be, it could be, it is. But I just thought it worked. And I think it has over the years.
It definitely has. It's a fun call, and it's good to hear that over the airwaves. Now, you had the opportunity, I believe it was either last year or 2 years ago, to call a couple Angels games. Can you walk us through what that meant to you and how that felt?
Wait, first of all, it seems like it was just a year or two ago, but it was actually 2016 in which
Oh, wow.
I had the opportunity to do 2 3-game series, one in May in Seattle against the Mariners, and one in July at Camden Yards, a 3-game series against Baltimore. And I was tickled to death that Terry Smith, the longtime radio voice of the Angels, had to go to a wedding in Washington, D.C., and they called me. Ironically, for the Seattle series, I was walking along the waterfront in Tacoma at the time, and they asked if I would be able to do it, and I said, absolutely, no doubt about it. And admittedly, I did break down a little bit finally getting this opportunity, because the Angels, the way they have it set up, they have a play-by-play guy and an analyst, not 2 play-by-play guys who split the innings. I got to do the entire game, and I get to what was then still called Safeco in Seattle about 2 o'clock, 5 hours before first pitch, set my stuff down on the counter, and kind of looked out over the field, and I said, this feels right. This feels good. And so really, I didn't have much in the way of nerves. I knew a little bit of my analyst, Mark Langston, the former Major League pitcher. And again, no nerves. And then 2 minutes before my first shot on the air with the pregame show, Mark Gubicza, the former big league pitcher, comes over from the TV booth and gives me the Leslie Nielsen to Peter Gray's "We're all counting on you" speech from Airplane. So that really loosened things up. And then 2 nights later, Albert Pujols hits a big 3-run homer in the 9th inning to win a game. And one of the beat writers for the Angels asked me, that must have been fun to call. And I said, well, much more fun than the last time I did. And they go, what do you mean by that? I said, well, in 2000, when he was a 19-year-old nobody up from the Midwest League to play for the Memphis Redbirds in the PCL Finals, he hit a walk-off home run in the bottom of the 13th to give Memphis the title over the Buzz. The last game, the team was known as the Buzz, and it also gave Memphis the championship.
Wow, that's awesome. That's an excellent story. Thank you for walking us down that. One last baseball question before we dive into the Weber State preview. Salt Lake has made waves in the last year, saying they want to get into the Major League Baseball game. They have a coalition, the Big League Utah, that is headed by Gail Miller and the Miller Group to try and bring Major League Baseball to Salt Lake City. What do you think, Steve, the chances that in the next 5 to 10 years we'll be watching a team suit up against, say, the Yankees or the Red Sox or the Cubs right here in Salt Lake City?
I think the chances are good so long as everything goes through, because it's not finalized yet with Oakland moving to Las Vegas. But I think in the West, Las Vegas would be the biggest competition and probably would be a little bit above Salt Lake as far as the opportunity. It sounds like that once Oakland and Tampa Bay are settled and they expand by 2 teams, they want one in the East and one in the West. And I think if Oakland does finalize everything and does relocate, Salt Lake is easily the number 1 location in the West. I think Portland was at one time, but I think Salt Lake is far surpassed. They have more in place than Portland does, and Portland's been doing this for a long time, just to the point where Dale Murphy, who's from Oregon and now lives in Alpine, Utah, left the Portland group to join the Salt Lake group. So I think the chances are pretty good so long as everything's solidified with Oakland moving to Las Vegas.
Man, I hope so. That would be a dream to have Major League Baseball here in Salt Lake. It'd be incredible. And I vote for it. If it happens, we'd be called the Salt Lake Gulls. Just something about that name. It's got ties to Salt Lake, is one of the minor league teams. It's just a cool name, I would think. So I hope it happens.
It's a good name, but it also brings back memories of unpaid bills and per diem checks bouncing in Hawaii and stuff like that. And of course, now the Salt Lake Gulls are the Albuquerque Isotopes with that 10-year span in Calgary in between.
Huh, interesting. Well, that would be a good way to rectify the name then, to bring a major league team and wash out all those memories. So anyway, as mentioned, this
you like that,
yeah.
I was going to say, you like that Miami Dolphin teal and orange?
Well, I mean, I don't hate it, but there's something. I saw a mock-up of the orange hat and the orange jersey, and it looked cool to me. So I don't know. Maybe I like kind of the old school look, but I mean, there's a lot of possibilities, I guess. Okay, so about this upcoming game, the Utes take on the Weber State Wildcats. Weber State is coming off of 6 playoff appearances in the last 7 years. That Jay Hill really turned them into an FCS power. And brought a lot of success up there to Weber State. They're led by running back Damon Bankston, who last year he had 700 yards and I believe 8 touchdowns. This year he's already almost at 300 yards and 5 touchdowns after 2 games. So he's tracking really well. What can you tell us about the offense at Weber State, Steve? About Damon, what some of his strengths are, and what Utah can expect on Saturday?
Well, one of the things about the coaching change is that the new head coach is more offensive oriented than Jay Hill. Mickey Mental was actually the offensive coordinator last year. He likes to open things up. His goal is to have over 200 yards rushing and 200 yards passing in a game. So he's not, one of those run and shoot type guys. He likes to see balance in the offense, but he wants successful balance. And obviously, it all starts up front. It's a veteran offensive line led by the Itaki brothers, who Noah's at left tackle and Ethan's at left guard. Noah's an All-American from last year. Jordan Latui, a kid out of West Valley City and Hunter High School, anchors the right side of the line at right guard. A new center, Andrew Carter, but he's a senior veteran guy that looked good when I saw the game on Saturday. Gavin Ortega is the new right tackle, and he's a kid out of Bellingham, Washington at 6'5", 310, so good size at the right tackle position. But the run game is very strong. It may not be as deep as it's been in recent years, but Damon Bankston, the running back that you mentioned, 263 yards, 7.5 yards a carry, 131 yards per game. Solid backup in Chris Jackson, a 5'10", 200-pound senior who's completely changed his body. He was a little thick the last couple of years. He was kind of like the bowling ball at the goal line when the Wildcats needed to punch it in, but he's a versatile running back as well. They've got a freshman, Adrian Cormier from Texas, who I think is going to be a good one as well. So maybe they've had a lot of talent at the running back in recent years. Again, maybe not as deep as it's been, but that depth is being developed. And I think by the time the season ends, it's going to be back to where it was. Okay.
Awesome. So yeah, definitely the veteran offensive line is something that they can rely on with the running game. Tell us about the quarterback, Kylan Weiser. What are his strengths? I know he's a 6th-year guy, 6th-year senior, so he's got a lot of experience, which bodes well in that position. Tell us about him and what his strengths are.
He's been a backup the last couple of years, and we had actually entered the transfer portal after the season last year, and he threw 2 touchdown passes in the playoff loss to Montana State as a backup. He had entered the portal, but then when Bronson Barron decided to transfer as well, the starting quarterback, Weiser pulled his name out of the portal and is solidly entrenched as the starting quarterback. It's going to take some time, I'm sure. A lot different when you come off the bench at a 30-point blowout as opposed to being a starting quarterback. But he's a kind of quarterback that, as opposed to some of the guys in recent years, he doesn't take needless chances. He's very solid, knows what to do with the football, knows to throw it away when he needs to, doesn't make ill-advised throws in pressure situations. So I think he's a kid. He's out of Notre Dame High School in Glendale, Arizona. Just a solid competitor, and I think he may not be as mobile as some of the quarterbacks that Weber State's had in the past, but he can run when he needs to. He had a 27-yard run in the ball game on Saturday at Northern Iowa. So he's going to be a solid guy at the FCS level for the Wildcats all season long.
Okay. It sounds like a guy kind of right up Kyle Whittingham's alley. Doesn't take a lot of unnecessary chances. That's kind of a man after Kyle Whittingham's heart for sure. Defensively, you're led by Winston Reed, who was voted as the preseason defensive player of the year in the Big Sky Conference. Tell us a little bit about him.
He's just he's a monster on defense. He graded out as good as possible from his effort against Northern Iowa. He has 23 tackles, 14 of them solo in just 2 games. He is an ultimate leader. As you mentioned, Big Sky defensive MVP of the preseason. He was an All-American last year. He's just a guy that, like any good middle linebacker, is the center of the defense. He's the play caller and does an outstanding job. He's got great sideline-to-sideline movement. And, the linebacking core is probably the strength of this defense, that and the depth of the defensive line. Because even though Jay's not here anymore, they have the 2 co-defensive coordinators that were there under Jay the last couple of years, Grant Duff and Joe Dale. I think that, to me, is one of the biggest questions for Weber State because, those 2 guys, obviously, when you have co-defensive coordinators, they're not always going to agree with each other. And, this like the 2 kids, and Jay Hill was the dad, and if those 2 disagreed, he could kind of oversee things and make the final decision. Well, it'll be interesting to see now because, as I said, Mickey Mental, the head coach, is an offensive guy, not a defensive guy, and so it'll be interesting to see how those 2 work together, and they certainly worked well together with Winston Reed in the defense on Saturday, shutting out Northern Iowa in the second half, forcing 6 turnovers in the game and sacking their quarterback 5 times.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure. One point you brought up that I think we should touch on is Joe Dale, co-defensive coordinator. If you look at the coaching staff at Weber State, they have several former Ute players up and down the board. They got Joe Dale, who was a safety at Utah. They got Big Con Robert Conley, who was an offensive lineman during the Brian Johnson years at Utah, and they've got a Ute legendary family anyway, Andre Dyson, coaching on the staff there. That seems to me that dynamic would make it a little extra sweet to come into Rice Eccles and potentially pull off a giant upset if they were able to accomplish it. Have you spoken to any of those guys about what it means to them to come back to Rice Eccles in a coaching capacity?
Well, it's especially, I think, meaningful for Andre from the standpoint that this is his first time. Joe Dale was with the team when they played there a few years ago, and I think it's also the first time. I guess Robert Conley was there for that game as well. So it's kind of the first time that Andre's come back in a coaching situation for Weber, and I think he's really looking forward to this opportunity. I mean, obviously, it's a long shot at best, but remember last time, Rashid Shaheed, the outstanding wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints, ran a kickoff back for a touchdown to give the Wildcats a 7-3 lead. And then any momentum that was gained by that for Weber State was lost with an 1.5-hour long lightning delay. And that kind of cooled things off a little bit. And they kind of, the Utes kind of took charge from that point on. But, these guys do have experience against FBS teams and even an FBS win last year. Last year was great. They got $390,000 to play in Logan, beat Utah State by 28. So anything's possible, but obviously it's going to be a long shot on Saturday.
Yeah, you mentioned that 2019 game. I remember that Shaheed was amazing on that kick return. I had a couple Weber fans right behind me. They're going crazy. And then the lightning hit, and I stood in the portal with my 10-year-old son huddling under my jacket for an hour and a half. We were down at that point 7-3, but then they came out and made a run. But Weber State seems to play Utah really well. I remember in 2018, they opened up at Rice Eccles, and late into the second quarter, Weber had a lead until Zach Moss ripped off a 90-yard touchdown run. It was, I believe, 10-7 Weber at that point. So, yeah, man, I think it's not as easy as just showing up to get a win. You've got to be focused. We've got to take these guys seriously because they have talent. They're a good team, and as evidenced by past matchups, they can come in motivated and ready to go. So, in that vein, what does Weber have to do, Steve, to pull off this upset?
First things first would be a clean sheet as far as turnovers are concerned, because that's going to be a big problem if Utah can take the football away, something that they're very good at, and they give themselves short fields. That would be very, very tough on the Wildcats. They're going to have to grind out long drives and get points off those long drives so that the offense for Utah doesn't have the football, regardless of who the quarterback might be at a given series. And so I think that would be two things. And I also think, and this is not just for this game, but for the rest of the season, the Wildcats have to come out of this game as healthy as possible. If they can stay healthy and let the starters do their thing, maybe they can make a run at it. But obviously, looking at things in the long run and looking at the needs to win the Big Sky and make it to the FCS playoffs again, they got to come away and get through this game 100% healthy.
Yeah, that's obviously the great X factor is injuries. What does the season prospectus look like for the Wildcats competing in the Big Sky and making the playoffs for a seventh time in 8 years?
It's not going to be easy because this is a Big Sky that's loaded this year. I believe currently there are 6 teams, maybe 7 teams ranked in the top 25. I think they have the talent to do so. They don't play Montana. They don't play Idaho, which is, they're coming off that 33-6 win right here in Reno against the Nevada Wolfpack. So I think if they stay healthy and the offense develops and the defense stays solid, I think they can challenge for yet another Big Sky title and certainly an FCS playoff berth. Hopefully they'll get a better seed than they got last year when they didn't get a seed, when they certainly deserved to. So I think, they've built a situation at Weber State where they have high expectations. This is easily the best period in football history for this school, and they just want to hope that they can continue what they're doing and pick up where they left off with Coach Jay Hill, who went on to BYU, which I really think the last 3 years with Jay were just borrowed time because you knew he was going to go somewhere. I didn't think he was going to go down south, but I'm sure he's doing well there, and he's keeping an eye on this team as well. So I think they have a chance to be very successful again in the Big Sky. Hopefully, maybe get a little bit deeper into the playoffs than they have in the past. They have made the semifinals once, quarterfinals a couple of times, so maybe they can take that next step in the postseason.
Yep, Jay Hill's an awesome coach. Really, really revitalized that program up there. Obviously, we know that he's a former Ute player. And was also on Kyle Whittingham's coaching staff for a while. I wouldn't be surprised, and I hope at some point he's back up on the hill, whether that's in a head coaching capacity or a coordinator capacity. I'm not sure, but we got to get him back in the red, man. It just doesn't look right seeing him in that darkest shade of royal blue.
No, that doesn't look right. But, he finally remembers his days. There was a season opener a few years ago where the Wildcats opened at San Diego State, and I was getting set to do the pregame interview with Jay, and he points over to the far side at about the 7-yard line. He goes, "You see that spot over there?" And I said, "Yep. That's where I made my first collegiate interception against the Aztecs." So he remembers those days fondly, that's for sure.
Awesome, man. That's good to hear. Okay, so we want to wrap up here real quick. Get your last thoughts on not necessarily a score prediction. I don't know if you can do that, being the voice of the Wildcats, but just maybe the way you expect Saturday's game to unfold.
Well, obviously, some of it has to deal with, who's going to be a quarterback. Are we going to finally see Cam Rising get a couple of series in to be tuned up for Pac-12 play next week against UCLA? But I think as a whole, it's probably one of those games where you're going to see maybe play toe-to-toe for a quarter and a half or so, and then maybe Utah can flex its muscles. Actually, maybe we could do some more field goal for touchdown exchanges because the Wildcats have a kickoff return guy this year that may even be better than Rashid Shaheed. His name is Abraham Williams, against Central Washington. He returned a kickoff 100 yards for a touchdown. He now has 5 100-yard kickoff returns for touchdowns in his last 9 games.
Oh wow!
Oh my gosh.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
so he's only 2 touchdown returns for shy of Shaheed's FCS record of 7 in a career.
Yeah, and that's in 9 games. You're saying he's got 5 already, huh? That's spectacular.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. It was they never kicked to him the entire game at Northern Iowa, so it was a shame not to see him do his thing.
Huh, man, that's high praise to compare him to Shaheed, but those stats back it up. So, any other last questions, Brendan or Pete, you have before we let Steve get back to his
I would
day?
love to know how long it takes Steve to prepare for a game, any game. Like he calls so many games. Is it just secondhand or?
Yeah, it pretty much is. Between the football, basketball, and baseball, I'm doing 195 games a year. So it's at 68 now. It's time to slow down. That's why I'm stepping down from the Bees job after this season. But I spent an hour and a half before I got on the phone with you guys to get ready for the baseball game tonight. Obviously, I won't be flying back for the game on Saturday, unfortunately. I'd love to be there, but that takes several days worth of preparation to do the depth chart, put down notes on the chart, and just get ready for the different games. But for me, the preparation is half the fun. For baseball, for example, I keep a 4x6 index card on every player in the league, so I have notes there right in front of me that I add to during the course of the season, and just between that and all the stories that I've accumulated, and even going down to the batting cage before a game, like I found out the other day that we have a player who is a huge New York Jets fan, and he's a rather loud guy. And so I walked up to him at the batting cage yesterday, and I go, by the way, Kevin, I'm on the 31st floor, and I was watching the game from my room. I could swear I heard you yelling and screaming on that punt return for a touchdown by the Jets from the sports book at the casino. He looked at me and goes, "You're probably right."
I had a quick question for you, Steve. Now that you're at the latter end of your career and looking back, could you just talk a little bit about how you got where you are? Was this kind of a set of goals that you had for yourself, or do you kind of just believe that it was opportunity that met preparation, or how do you what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think part of it is it's something that I've always wanted to do since I was 10 years old. As a matter of fact, I think when I was 11, I sold Christmas cards door to door and earned enough points to get my own tape recorder. And I would take it to where nobody else was sitting at Wrigley Field, Comiskey Park, and even Chicago Stadium, and practice doing baseball and basketball. As a matter of fact, for those games that I practiced with at Chicago Stadium, that's when Jerry Sloan was playing for the Bulls. So I go back that far. And so it's something I always wanted to do. My high school had its own FM radio station. I got to broadcast the varsity football game the third week of my freshman year when I was 13 years old. I still remember we lost 34-0, and my cousin was the quarterback, but because he was so lousy that day and had a different last name, I never mentioned the fact he was my cousin. But then 2 years later, when they went undefeated, he was gold cousin Bob on the radio. So it's just something I've always wanted to do. I've had to work hard. I didn't go to college. I've had to do everything on my own. And I've been fortunate enough to catch a couple of breaks and able to fly to Salt Lake and be interviewed for the Jazz pre-half and post-game show back in '91. Got the job. Baseball came a few years later. And well, it's hard to believe that we're coming to a close. By the time next Sunday rolls around, it'll be 4,181 games for the Buzz Stingers and Bees.
Incredible.
Wow, incredible.
That could be a movie. They should make your life into a movie, Steve.
I don't know. It put people to sleep, I think. But I guess to put that in perspective, that's 1,000 more games with the Salt Lake baseball team than Hot Rod did with the Jazz.
Yep.
Wow.
They got that banner sitting in Vivint. They got to raise one for Mr. Klauke for sure.
You know what? It's been. I don't know about that, but they did a nice thing this week and surprised me that next Saturday on what's I guess my night or whatever at the ballpark, first 1,500 fans get a Steve Klauke bobblehead.
Yeah.
Hey, there you go.
That's
pretty cool.
That's cool. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on here, Steve. Like I said, you are the voice of baseball in this market. You have an iconic voice, very along the lines of Vin Scully iconic, at least in this area here. And we're grateful for you taking time out of your busy day to join us. We appreciate all the work you've done in this city and for the Buzz, the Stingers, the Bees, and of course Weber State. And we wish you safe travels back from Reno and a good competitive game on Saturday when Weber State lines up against Utah. So again, we appreciate you joining us, Steve, and taking time out of your day. I am Salt Lake Jake, and I am out.
Jake in Salt Lake City. Hey Jake, how are you? Salt Lake Jake. Salt Lake Jake.
Salt Lake Jake.